story for a Sunday morning. Like a beheading before brunch. One of the commentaries I looked at last week kind of raised the question, so where is the good news in this passage? And kind of concluded that there might not be any good news. Usually from week to week we hear a gospel that has some little message for us about how to live, or how to be like Jesus, or how to be with our brothers and sisters here in the community and in the world. Some positive message, but this one just really seems to put the uglier side of human nature on display without any really particular redeeming features. But I don't know, it's a story about betrayal, it's a story about the lust for power, and it seems likely that there probably was another kind of lust going on there when the guys at the party all watched the dancer. And yet, even in all of this ugliness, I think there are good lessons for us to learn. And to get those, I think we need to look at the story a little bit more closely. So King Herod decides to throw a birthday party for himself. And he invites the members of his court, and he invites all the people who are important in the territory of Galilee, which is the major part of the land that he ruled, Galilee and the Transjordan. There's food and there's drink, of course, and when things are really in full swing and the guests are feeling pretty happy, this young girl comes out to dance for them. And the guests love it. They obviously really just love it. And I imagine by this point, Herod is probably just a little bit tipsy, and he's kind of showing off to impress both the girl and his guests. And he swears that he'll give her anything she asks for. He swears it, even if she asks for half of his kingdom. Well, she doesn't want half of his kingdom, and she doesn't ask for a new iPhone or whatever the first century equivalent was, some little bauble that he thought she was going to request, maybe some jewelry, maybe some nice jewelry. She wants John the Baptist's head on a platter, or at least her mother wants John the Baptist on a platter. This is not what Herod had in mind. Herod, in some strange kind of logic, had arrested John the Baptist in order to protect him from his wife. He liked listening to it, we hear, even though he didn't always understand what the Baptist was trying to say. And he puts him in prison so that his wife can't get at him with her plots. But he can't go back on his word in front of the guests because he has sworn that he will give this to the girl. And to go back on an oath is sort of like taking the name of God in vain. I mean, it isn't just your pride that's at stake, you know, it's serious, you can't do it. So this one is a win for Herodias, the wife, nicely played. She gets the head. Herod sends a soldier immediately to behead him, puts it on a platter as requested, brings it back to the feast, and the girl gets it and gives it to her mother. So the backstory here, first of all, this is not the same Herod who was willing to kill all of the little baby boys trying to get Jesus. This one is, that one was Herod the Great, the father. This one is Herod Antipas, who was one of the sons, who divided up the kingdom when the father died. And Herodias, his wife, Herod Antipas's wife Herodias, was originally married to one of his brothers, who also had a name that began with Herod. This is a somewhat complicated family tree, and it doesn't help that they're all named Herod. But anyway, Herod Antipas and Herodias met and found that they liked each other a lot more than they liked the spouses that they were with at the time. It may have been their mutual lust for power that sort of was the attraction. And so they ditched the spouses and married each other. And the daughter of the wife is the stepdaughter of the king who has her dancing. So I think Herodias saw Herod as a man who was going places, and she wanted to sort of hitch her wagon to his star. She wanted to make sure he got there, and she wanted to make sure she was there at his side. Sort of like one of the power couples rules that we still have among us in our politics over the last few decades. And then John the Baptist comes along, and he starts preaching that this is wrong, this is against Jewish law, and Herod here is still kind of interested and perplexed, but Herodias knows she wants John out of the way. She doesn't want to hear that message, and she starts to work on getting rid of him. So Herod puts John in jail, and that doesn't play out quite the way Herod had hoped, and that's the end of John the Baptist. But it isn't the last that we hear of this King Herod. If you remember, at the very end of Jesus' life, when he's arrested, he's taken first to the chief priest, and that interrogation goes on overnight. And he's then sent to Pilate, who is the ruler on behalf of the Roman Empire of Jerusalem, because they want the death penalty, and it's only the civil authorities who have the power to grant that. So Jesus is sent to Pilate, and then Pilate decides to send him to Herod, because Herod is the ruler of the area where Jesus is from, so he actually has some jurisdiction here, and he just happens to be in Jerusalem. So Jesus is sent to Herod, who is quite happy and excited to meet him, because he's heard about this Jesus, and he's heard about all of these miracles and signs, and he wants to see Jesus perform a sign. Basically, he wants to see Jesus perform a little trick, see how good he is. But Jesus gets to Herod, and although he's questioned intensely, he says nothing and does nothing, which is very frustrating for Herod, who dresses him in a fancy robe and sends him back to Pilate. And these two guys, these two civil rulers, Herod and Pilate, who had been enemies, become fast friends and allies in this transaction. And we know how that story turns out. Actually, this story about John the Baptist is meant to be a sort of a prefiguring of the death of Jesus. So the disciples already know how things could turn out if they keep going this way, and yet they still do with passion. They don't always understand it, but they do. They follow Jesus even in the face of the danger, which will in fact catch up with many of them. So one of the questions I like to ask myself when I'm looking at a Bible story, or when I'm thinking about preaching a particular passage, is, who in this story do you identify with? Who do you admire? Who would you want to be? How do you see yourself playing that out? And when I looked at this story, the answer is nobody. Nobody. Maybe John the Baptist, at least he's an honorable man, but then again, not that ending. There really isn't anyone in this story that I identify with or that I want to be. That kind of ties into the idea that there's no good news in the story. But I think there are really good lessons to be learned beyond the one about not trying to show off in front of your drunken friends, or not trying to promise more than you really intend to deliver. I see some lessons for us in particular by looking at the character of King Herod, who, interestingly enough, had the opportunity to meet both John the Baptist and Jesus. Quite a privilege, really, and he had a role in both of their deaths. Not a particular honor as we look back on it. I think there's two lessons that I see here in particular. And one is a lesson about paying attention to the prophets who speak among us, who bring us back to God, who give us a message that we need to hear, who tell us when we're not on the right track. And I do believe that we have those prophets among us. I also think there's a lesson here for us what to do when we meet God. And I also believe that we have opportunities to meet God, to see Jesus moving among us in our own daily lives. Mark's Gospel says that King Herod liked listening to Jesus, even though when he heard him, he was greatly perplexed. Now you have to wonder, what exactly did he like hearing? He was being told that he was living in sin, basically. I mean, John's whole message as a prophet was to speak out against the ways that he saw people going off track, the way he thought the people of his time had lost touch with their values and with what it meant to live a righteous life. He preached a message of repentance. It was a message of fairly harsh criticism, in other words. So you have to wonder, what did Herod find entertaining about it? And I wonder if maybe there's a place in our hearts, in all of our hearts, that likes to hear other people who we don't approve of being criticized. Yeah, you tell them. You tell them what's wrong. Especially when we can find a way to say, well, they're not talking about us, right? Because we're the good guys. That doesn't apply to us. I wonder if we don't do that. Herod got himself a prophet and kept him safely in jail, almost like a little pet. And when he was in the mood, he brought him out and listened to him, and then sent him back and locked him up when he wasn't. And I think maybe it would be convenient if we could sort of lock God up in a safe place, lock God up in part of our lives. Listen to God when we want to, but not when it's inconvenient for us. Listen to the good news of the gospel. Listen to the basic Christian message when we can hold it up and say, those other people aren't living up to that, but it really doesn't apply to us because we're the good guys. Jesus said, don't let the way you practice religion become a burden for anybody. Jesus said, love your enemies. Jesus said, don't store up treasures for yourself here on earth. Jesus said, go out 2 by 2 and spread the good news, and don't take any extra stuff along with you. And, we sort of do that, right? Sometimes when it's convenient. My iPhone's in my office. I stored up Mac software and hardware for myself on Earth. Because that doesn't apply to me, right? That stuff about not storing up treasures. Jesus sat down to eat with sinners and tax collectors, not with kings and high priests. Herod heard about Jesus and was curious, but what he wanted was to hear him perform some sign. Herod heard about John the Baptist and liked to bring him out and listen to him, but John wasn't invited to that party, Herod wanted to see Jesus perform a sign, a little trick, a party trick. And I know that there have been times in my life when I wanted some sign from God also. Now, I never said, God, give me a party trick. But I have said, give me a sign, Sometimes I wanted a sign that I could build my own faith on. And really, I think that faith isn't about signs and wonders, it's about relationship. And sometimes I wanted a sign, a miracle. Sometimes I just wanted God to fix things for me, solve my problems, heal whatever was wrong with me, heal my physical problems, heal my relatives. Fix us up, and then please go away again. And sometimes when I asked, Jesus seemed to stay silent. But maybe the relationship that Jesus has in mind is bigger than that, bigger than signs and wonder. Maybe our faith is supposed to be bigger than that too, because really I do think that it's about relationship. I don't think that we're going to be judged on whether we understood and believed in everything in the creeds. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the creeds are really important. That's another sermon for another day. This is our heritage. This is the thing that binds us to Christians down through time. And we say the Nicene Creed here every week because it is important. But I don't think that ultimately when we go out of here, it's our intellectual assent to the points of that creed that make us good people. I think it's all about our relationships with God and with each other. So I leave you with 2 questions to ponder in the week ahead. One is, what would you talk about with John the Baptist if you had a chance to have him come out and spend an evening with you, what would you want to talk about? What would you want to hear him talk about? And what would be the quality of your listening? How could you take that to heart? Would you, or would you send him back to his cell at the end of the night? But even more important than that is that question, I think, that I see in this guy, King Herod, who met Jesus at the end of his life. What would you do if you met Jesus? What would you want from him? What would you expect from him? That question, don't skim over it. I think it's utterly important. What would you do if you met Jesus? It's one that we ought to be able to answer, because we do meet Jesus. You have Jesus and God. We see Jesus in the people we're with here. We see Jesus in the people we meet. We see God at work in the world. What would you do? You have seen him and you will again.